Welcome back, everyone. In the last video, we set up some of the base structure for our application. In this video, we are going to expand upon that and actually transform this to look closer to what we have in our final product. We're just going to build upon some of those concepts that we learned in Monsters Rolodex in order to actually flesh this out before, again, we start componentizing even just this directory. To begin with, what we want to do is just apply some basic styling while also abstracting out the work that we need to do. So, as we can see here, notice how essentially all of these components are duplicated 5 times. We hard-coded this at first because it was the easier thing to do, but as we scale, this definitely doesn't make sense. Essentially, we're repeating the same code here where these values, where it's pretty much just the H2s, are the only places where it's essentially different. Maybe the image is different, but we haven't even tackled that yet. But we can already tell that this value is going to be repeated just using a different value. So this is a good place for us to actually start optimizing a little bit. So instead of hard coding out these 4 other sections, what we can do is we can actually initialize some variable array. And I want to call this thing the directories or the categories. And this is going to be an array that contains objects that reflect what it is that we have in here. So to begin with, let's just start with 1. Let's just figure out the shape of what it is that we want to display. We know for sure that we have a title value. This title is going to be hats because that's essentially what we're going to display first, just the hat. And then we know that there is also a subtitle. And the subtitle here is Shop Now. But let's think about this. Every single one of our different categories is also going to say Shop Now. So technically, you don't actually need to pass this. This value can actually be hard-coded. So you actually don't even need a subtitle because you know that Shop Now is going to be present in every single one of your categories. So that's a good way to determine what values you need in your object versus which ones you don't. I'm also going to initialize an ID just so that it's more clear. And let me just start using these categories here. So we know that inside of our categories container, we're going to map over the categories. So remember, wrap it in your squiggly brackets, then say categories.map, and you're going to pass it a function where you get the category. And then what you're going to do is you are now going to copy this through. So actually, let's do a single line return of our JSX here. And inside, let's make sure to use this title value. So instead of taking category, let's just destructure this off completely. And then inside of here, we'll just render title. So far, what we're doing is we're just setting up our code so it's easy to add these objects into our categories and then have React, of course, reflectively generate multiple divs. So let's save this and just make sure it's working for just our one object so far, which is our hats. And we see that it's working. Now, if we were to duplicate this, let's say the 5 times, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let's remember what we had. We had hats, jackets, sneakers, women's, and men's. Let's save this. Let's go back to our application. And we see, just like that, we've replicated this behavior very quickly, very easily. So just to recap, what we did is we took and went from our hard-coded JSX over to a more dynamic and reusable version of our JSX. And this is going to reflect our category component that we're eventually going to use. But before we start migrating out into a components folder and doing all of that code, let's just make sure that everything we want here in one file makes sense. This is a good way to practice writing your React because it gets complicated once you start navigating and making multiple files. When you're working in the beginning, just do it all in one file when you're getting used to the way that React is written and the way that the code works. Now, one of the great advantages is that we can now easily modify all of our components in one place. So let's say we wanted to actually use an image. And in our particular case with this background image, we can use a div, and I'll show you how the styling works for a background image. But as far as the idea goes, it's very easy to set this up because now we can just apply it in one place and all 5 components will reflect this change. So this is one of the main advantages of writing our code in React, is that it becomes very simple. You essentially have data that becomes your UI. And all we need to do now is just apply what we want to call this. So let me say I call this background image just for now. It doesn't actually have an image because we haven't given it anything, nor have we told how it can be a background image. But as far as the idea goes, it's very easy to reflect this across all of our different HTML components, the 5 different categories that are now reflective here. So now that we understand the setup of how to convert our data in JavaScript into our JSX UI, we can now actually start styling this component, which we'll do in the next video. We're going to learn about Sass, we're going to learn about how to add that into React, and we're going to learn about how to actually start making this look the way we want it to in our final result. So let's do that in our next video.